Okay, I think I'd like, is this working? I think I'd like to get started because I have a lot of stuff prepared and I think time will become short anyway. My name is Sieglinde Schreiner-Linford. I will speak about usability principles of web design. Studies of web usability and advice on improved web design, I think, has been a reaction to the prolific number of really, really bad web pages out there. It's become very fashionable, very much talked about, and a very expensive thing, getting in usability consultants. I would like to speak just about the principles. You see, I have here 12 points, so it is a lot that I'll try to cover. But I would like not just to leave it at the abstract discussion of principles, I'd also like to go briefly to the Cali Web Page, which some of you may know has been completely reworked over the last months. It has gone online in its new version a month ago. And I was involved as a consultant in that redesign process, and I'd like just to show some of the principles that we try to apply in the redesign process. One of the methods we used to evaluate the old site structure was to look in very great detail at the usage patterns of the old site. And as a third point, I'd like to briefly touch on log analysis of web sites and what one can learn from those analysis about the functioning of a website, about its weaknesses and about its strengths. As I say here in footnote 1, throughout the talk I draw on thoughts from Jacob Nielsen, who is probably the most well-known exponent of usability studies. Why is usability important? The web allows easy and immediate access to an overwhelming number of alternative offers. That means people aren't logged into your sites. A site has to prove its worth to a user, and it normally has to prove its worth to a user very fast. Whether it's cultural, generational, or just what happens on the web, we know from studies that the attention span and the span of patience of users on the web is extremely low. And then I personally think life on the web is hard enough. There are response delays, it's difficult to find stuff. When you've found it, it is difficult to evaluate how valid your resources are. Why put up with additional unnecessary hardship in dealing with sites where you can't find what you want? And lastly, this is sort of an economic argument. On websites, usability is experience before the buy. It's not that you can tell people how great your product is going to be and they will believe you, buy it, and find it doesn't work. No, they look at the site, they find it doesn't work, and off they go. Websites are the first and often the only impression that a user, a prospective student, a prospective faculty member, somebody who's working in the legal profession will get of a law school. If their website isn't working, why should I believe they are any good at teaching law? And so on. I would really like to rush through these points quite a lot because it will be on the web, you can read it up. I would much more prefer to get questions, discussion points, than just telling you what basically you can read. I think the two basic questions that should come before any design of a website, or nowadays more probably the redesign of a web page. What can a website do for the institution that's going to put up the website? Whom do the website owners want to use their site, and what do they want to use it for? I think that is something that has become a lot better. Looking at web pages, I have more the impression that nowadays people don't just put up a website because you have to have a website, but they have gone through some thought why they are doing it and what they want to offer. But I think the second as important question is still very frequently not asked. Who wants to use my website, and what do they want to use it for? I think it's It's a basic mistake to assume that anybody out there in the world is as interested in your institution as you as a person working for your institution is. And so you will have to offer them some value that they get from your pages. I will go sort of in a bit hierarchical way. I'll go from the page design over the design of navigational pages to site design, not because I think this is a sequence of importance. Actually, I think site design is the most important, but because it is easier to see things in concrete, and then I hope that by the time we arrive at site design, it will become what the principles mean in concrete. As only one page at a time is rendered, pages have to combine the context, that is the navigation of a site, and the content of that specific page at the same time. The major aim in page design is to create pages that are clear and that can be scanned. And both the aims are reached, I think, only through simplicity. Pages have to make sense in themselves. That means the concept of designing the way through a site is doomed to failure. Navigation is controlled by the user. The user may not come to your pages at a place where you expect them. They may come from a search engine, from a bookmark, from an external link. And they may have their own ideas where they want to go and what they want to see. I think the consequence of this for every single content page has to be that pages have to have a consistent link to the home page and to a relevant navigation page that is below the home page and will allow a user to see the immediate context of where they are. All pages have to have links to the next related page. It's useless to assume that people have seen where they are because they have come from a certain point. They may not. And except for very limited purposes, like a series of forms that perform a certain task, pages should never rely on having seen a specific page before and going to see a specific page after the page we are talking about. And pages should make sense as fast as possible while they are still loading. Clear. People sit in front of their screen, they get bored, they think this takes too long, they think this page doesn't have what I want, they click, they go away. So they need information what's happening here fast. The page has to have more text than images, especially at the top of the page, which is against all practice in web design. Complex tables have to be broken up. Tables take relatively long to load, and they are used often excessively to control the layout of pages. They can have really significant effect on downloading time, and while they load, nothing will be visible. There have to be width and height tags for all images, so the surrounding text can be rendered before the image is loaded. I don't know. I remember saying these things 5 years ago, and it still is a frequent thing to notice. Pages that have enormously big graphical elements that will block the loading of the text because there is no alt and height tag that will allow the browser to reserve the space and load the text before the image. All images have to have alt tags, so before the graph is loaded, the user knows already what the graph is about. Is it a picture of the dog of the webmaster, or is it a map of the campus? The one I might be interested in, the other not. And graphics should, of course, be web optimized. That means they should have the optimum quality for the purpose at the minimum size. The optimum quality for the purpose normally is not very high because screens aren't that good yet. Home pages and main navigational pages. I've talked about pages in general up to now. I'll now talk about home pages and about content pages. Home pages have to decompose the complexity. They have to give context, a description of content, and demonstrate the navigational scheme. They have to tell the user immediately what is the site about, who is it for, who is it from. This is especially important if it is a site that users will want to evaluate in terms of validity of the content. Is this just is this just a student who has hacked together some papers, or is it an official repository of documents, for example? The homepage has to give, and normally it does that, entry points to the next level of navigation, but it also should give frequently used entry routes. So if it's time for students to apply at law schools, you may want for that time of the year to put a direct link to application pages on the homepage, which you normally wouldn't have during the year. And I think a very, very basic and very important principle is to remember that there may be more than one good solution of navigating a site. There may be ways through a site that make sense for one audience but not for another audience. And different audiences may look for different things. Excuse me. I also, during this talk, I will talk about websites as generic things. Websites are not generic things. Websites have very, very different scopes and very different kinds of content on them. Actually, I talked about different types of websites last year. If you're interested, you can go to the Cali page, which we'll see in a while, and have a look at that talk. On the web, some level of redundancy is a good thing. Homepage should be a nice page, an enticing page. All websites have high levels of one-page visits. That means people come to a site, look at the first page they see, say, oh no, and off they are. This can be up to a level of a third or even half of the visits to a site. And obviously you don't want to encourage that with ugly or slow homepage. The homepage, especially the first and second level navigational pages, should give concise descriptions of the content that can be expected at the lower level. If you say you have a page with research institutions, with publications, I think at that level the user should already get an idea of what kind of information he or she can be expecting. If you expect somebody to click through 4, 5, 6 pages and then discover that your publications is just a top-level list, people will probably not be terrifically happy. I think at that level you should tell people whether there will be just lists of publications, whether there will be tables of content, or whether there will be full text. So the aim in all of this is to shorten the way of a user through the site to the information and to let them know in time whether the information they will find is appropriate for them or not. The homepage should establish a professionally looking site presence. It should establish the credibility of the site. Unfortunately, I think the way in which this often is done is not a very helpful one. I don't mean of going to a graphics designer and spend a lot of money in just getting some cute design up that is meaningless but looks expensive. The homepage should have no clutter, no irrelevant information, and it should very definitely not be a splash screen. Splash screens are useless, wasteful, and self-importantly annoying, and they are that already the first time you look at them. If people need to look at them more than once, I think it's a progressive process. Content pages. The visible content on pages has to be maximized. It's incredibly astonishing if you ever get a copy of that book by Nielsen that I cite. He gives examples of content pages that have less than 20% of content on a page, and everything else is navigation, clutter, something that you might be interested in but you aren't, and advertisements. This is not a good situation. The navigation has to be minimized. It has to fulfill its function, but it is not a goal in itself, as much as one may be taken with the wonderful navigation scheme that one has just developed oneself. All navigational elements should be visible with the first screen full. I'm sorry. All navigational elements should be visible with the first screenful of a page, except for a repetition at the bottom of the page. Clutter makes it difficult to orient oneself on a page. White space can have a function in this. Moving elements, I think, have proved to show really superb justice. For years we have been saying never put any moving elements on your pages. They are terrible. It's an old anthropological reaction. If there is a moving element in the periphery of your vision, it will distract you, it will make it impossible to read. By now people have got so fed up with moving elements, which are normally advertisements, that they will completely ignore them. They are still disturbing, but they aren't seen. So there are two reasons now not to use them. A lot of content is still primarily read from paper. This means, I think, that whenever you assume that content will be read, there have to be two different versions of a document. There should be, I'm sorry, didn't go to the karaoke yesterday. If you can assume that documents will be read on paper, there should be a screen version and there should be a print version. I think it's just not good enough to assume that people will print from the screen version. It normally doesn't work very well. On the other hand, PDF is not an appropriate screen format, so it's not a good shortcut to think, oh, people will print this, I'll put the same version on screen. It is hopeless to orient oneself in it. And if you have anything like even a suspicion that you might have an international audience, documents should be formatted for printing on letter and on A4 paper, because it's impossible to get letter format paper in Europe. Page layout. I think these are all things that are pretty simple and straightforward, so I'll be really fast. Download speed matters more than ever. I think people who have been designing for the web started to think that download speed doesn't matter anymore because all the lines are so much faster. And if you designed at a time when people had 14.4 modems, there's no problem anymore with 50 point whatever modems, but I think that is simply not true. The bandwidth has not improved enough to allow for really big files to be downloaded easily. Studies show that a response time of less than 1 second is necessary to move comfortably through hypertext. That means if you want to move without the feeling that you're waiting, you need a response time of less than 1 second. A maximum realistic response time that will allow people to keep their attention focused on what they are doing, even if they know they are waiting, is 10 seconds. I've got a table here, which I think is something that everybody who designs web pages should have hanging on their wall. If you want a 1 second response time over a modem, the file is not to be bigger than 2K, and that is very small indeed. And that means not only the file that a person is clicking at the moment, it means all, including all external graphical elements. And even 150K for a 10-second response time over an ISDN line, that is reasonable. You can have graphical elements in it, but you certainly can't have an endless number of photographs of any size. And it still is important to keep things down. Okay, no unnecessary bloating with graphs. Ensure a fast connection from the server to the net. It's not just file size that counts. And for dynamically created pages, you have to ensure that the server is fast enough and that whatever creates the pages dynamically works efficiently. Users tolerate response delays much more easily if they are expected. So if you have big files or downloads, let users know what they have to expect, give them the file size so they know about what download delays they will see. Wasting a user screen by using a small screen area is bad. Trying to fit a huge graphic on a small screen is bad. I think page design should be resolution independent. And if you've bought front page, too bad. I mean, there is really no reason to design for a specific screen size. Display-oriented encoding shouldn't be used either, except perhaps in intranets, because you don't know what will become of it in the end. And I think the most important thing here is that layout of pages should be centrally managed, whether you do it with server-side includes or cascading style sheets or with templates. Really, in the end, depends on the circumstances of your server and your technical personnel, but it shouldn't be done on a page-by-page issue. It doesn't only help with maintainability of big sites, it will increase the download speed because the same graphical elements are used over and over again. It will help with the change of sites, and it will enforce user training, which is a good thing. It will also enforce that pages are designed by people who have perhaps a bit more understanding of necessities of web design than content providers. Links, they are what holds it all together. They should explicitly describe what can be expected at the other end of the link. Nobody wants to click and wait for a page and find out that that isn't what I wanted. Thank you very much. Links can still be prime content, but comprehensive linked lists should probably be left to hot lists, search engines. All the rules I'm mentioning here get broken. Some of them, I think, get broken more often than others. I think the next rule here, default link colors, should be used, is one that gets broken very, very often. I think it's also one that isn't a deadly sin to break it. But it will help users to orient themselves. I think it is much worse if people in their design don't distinguish between visited and unvisited links. That is a real problem for users, especially if they find it difficult to orient themselves on a page. They click here, they don't get where they want. They click somewhere else, they don't get where they want. They click a third place. And if the visited link doesn't change its color because it has been set to the same color as the unvisited link, it will increase confusion. Page titles and meta tags will help users to decide whether they want to follow a link. And links shouldn't lead to dead ends. Don't point to that publication list and then say, coming soon. What is perhaps much more important in this context is that this design of any site should take great care to encourage links to your site from other sites. Not just to the home page, but also to lower level navigational and branching pages and to specific content pages. Things that one can do to encourage that is to have permanent visible URLs, have quality content that other people want to link to, make it possible to link to your content at a level that is appropriate for the linking site. That means your pages should be organized in a way that allows somebody to come in from outside and to have a sense of the context, to know why they are there, to find the context, the content they are interested in. Deep linking is in many cases a very relevant source of site visits. Actually, a lot of sites get more visits from deep linking than from hits in search engines or from hits in the content in the homepage. And also, it's not just a numerical argument, it's a quality argument. If you have content on a page that somebody wants to link to from outside, it is sort of it's like a peer review. Somebody is saying there is good content here, it's relevant to what I'm talking about, so you're likely to get visitors on those via those paths that are really profiting from what you are putting there. And that makes everybody happy. Site design. Actually, this is an area where I think the Niels book I was citing is weaker than in others, but there are some excellent books on information architecture, and in the final version of this I'll put up a reading list and a link list. Usability studies show success rates as low as 25 to 50% if a user is asked to find a specific piece of information on a site or to perform a specific task, and I think that's appalling. And that is something that really needs to be addressed in site design. Navigation has to help the user to orient him or herself on a site. Where is she? Where has she been? Where can she go? Navigation schemes should show on all pages the name of the site, including a link to the home page, the relative position of a page within the site, and the main alternative areas of information. The site has to be structured according to the informational needs of users, not the organizational needs of the providers. That is a really hard thing to do, and it's actually a really costly thing to do, because it is much easier to organize a site that will follow your organizational lines. It is easy to give people authority to change certain parts of the site if the lines follow organizational lines, but it will very often be useless for a user. Users want the information they are interested in a certain point, not the information that human resources is providing as compared to student offices. If the site is even just reasonably complicated, it may be helpful to organize it into sub-sites or to organize it for different audiences. Navigation schemes can emphasize the breadth of a site. That means a bigger number of higher level categories, or the depth of a site. It can go from the top level down to specific pages or try to combine both. There are dangers in both ways of going. Sites that are too broad may seem overwhelming at first sight, but then they turn out to be relatively shallow. Sites that are too deep will require too many steps to finally get to content and bore the user off. A hierarchical organization of categories normally works reasonably well for users if the lower level categories clearly belong into the different headings. I don't know whether I'm just especially dumb about going to websites, but the number of times I find myself, especially on big commercial sites, and I am looking for a specific piece of information that I'm ready to swear is there, and I just don't know in which of the 5 top categories it might be, is shattering. And I think a well thought out combination of schemes will help in this. Users normally do not care very much about any single site, so however clever site providers are in designing their own navigational schemes, users are not likely to want to spend time learning them. So if there are 2 alternative solutions to a design problem, unfortunately it is more reasonable to go with the well-known, boring solution that everybody else is using, because users don't have to learn a new scheme. I mean, within limits, of course. If you're offering something really interesting that users will be wildly interested in, and they will go to any lengths, and they are prepared to spend 3 hours to get to it, you might be able to get away with it. And it's more fun, but it doesn't work as well. It's important to remember that users may come from very different backgrounds. don't rely that known symbols and semantic reference systems will work. I actually find myself during this conference all the time in a situation where people tell me about television shows that everybody knows, they refer to characters everybody knows. I don't know them. I don't know what they mean by it. So this happens a lot on the web. Things that make sense in a given context won't work outside. Navigational elements have to be clearly understandable. Being cute but meaningless will not work. A lot of people also try to organize their website in metaphors. Things, law school website, you use a law school building to organize the site. Somehow it's an idea that is terribly appealing to people, especially to decision makers. I don't know why, but probably because they have never sat down and tried to then actually design it and try to bend things into the metaphor that really just simply will not fit. They will not fit on the design side, and they will fit even less on the user side. Known graphical navigation elements without alt tags. I have already said that for graphical elements in general. It's especially important for navigational elements. If you have an up arrow or a down arrow or whatever, and you don't have an alt text, a visually impaired person will not be able to use it because they can't see it. And on top of that, you'll get problems because your sites won't conform to accessibility standards. Frames, I think, should just simply be dead. But the speed and eagerness with which frames were adopted, I think, are indicative of underlying structural problems in the present web model of navigation. So in a sense, the aim is to design a site that works as if it had frames, but doesn't have frames. It takes care of all the problems. And I'd like now to go for a short time to the Cali page. As I said, this is a redesigned, newly redesigned site. I've been involved in the redesign. It was great fun, and we hope it also works. We have chosen a double scheme of organizing material in the site. If you remember the old site, if you know it, it used to be a frame page. It used to have a sidebar in which it gave categories of people, and once you clicked on a category, librarian, faculty member, you would get a drop-down list of things that were potentially interesting for people, and it was just very, very difficult to find things. First of all, if you didn't know what is on the site, you had to click them all. If you had clicked one, you forgot what was on the other. It made getting a first impression of the material available on the site very difficult. So first of all, we establish the site presence. We give the logo. The logo is repeated on every single page. On every other page, it is a link. We give the name of the institution, and we try to immediately give the context in which this institution is working that is understandable for everybody. We also on all pages have these links about Cali, site index, sign in. Sign in is for a personalized version of Cali, and the search button. We decided there should be a search facility on every single page. I'll speak about searching in a little while. And then we have two basic entry schemes. We decided that the functional scheme is a primary scheme, learning the law, teaching the law, and technology in law schools. Under those headings, there is a complete list of all sub-areas that are represented on the site. So anybody who looks through this page has a relatively good idea of available materials at that level. Then there is a secondary scheme, law students by audience. So people who aren't really sure where they are here, they say, well, I'm a law librarian, what do they have for me? And that level, you get a more detailed inventory of everything that is available. The same with a different categorization is available from this scheme. So last thing on the home page, we have quick links. These are the alternative entry points I was talking about, Get Kali lessons, just simply because we know that this is the most frequent thing that people want to do. So there should be a single direct way for people to get there. And another thing that is used a lot is Enter Awards. That is the awards for excellence for students, and which is maintained by Kali and registers Enter Awards data here. And then we have a spotlight which gives new information, new services and things that are of seasonal interest. I'd like, as we are at the conference, let's go to this page. This is the general layout of all navigational pages, first level content pages. It gives homepage, general tools. It gives you the area where you are, technology. It gives you the sub area where you are, conference for law school computing. And then the content of that specific page. All of those are links, so you're within one click of all different areas of the site. And you're here in technology in law schools, you can go to the other subsites, again, within one click. These are all schematically produced. It's just a rule. If you are in technology, technology goes on the top, then the second sub-area goes on the top. These links are produced page by page. That means we actually did sit down and at every page of this level we thought what may be of direct interest to people who are on this page. So people can move around very fast laterally. You don't have to go up, look again, go down again. And I think I'll come back to this page later and go back to the web design. Are there any questions about this? Comments?
What is a link title?
A link title is additional information that can be put in an anchor tag. You have the href, and then you can put title equal, and put in a string of, I think, up to 60 characters, and it won't do anything in Netscape, but in Internet Explorer it will show up as like a help text. So it is.
It would behave like an alt text over at the end.
Exactly. Except it can be, it can be a bit extended compared to the text that you have immediately in the link. So it doesn't disturb Netscape, but it's useful in Internet Explorer. I very, very much believe in this. Poor design can ruin good content, but nothing can save poor content. If you don't have good content to offer, why in the end would people come? And you may need to run an organizational site that just gives information about an organization, and whoever is interested in that will come and look at it. But if there's nothing else, well, you can please yourself by putting up a nice design, but it won't make it used. On the other hand, if you have good content and you don't present it in a way that people will find it, you may as well not have it. Content has to be useful for the user. However important things are from the provider's point of view, there's no way to make people look at it. Content has to be presented in a web-specific way, and that's where it really gets a bit more complicated. Reading on a screen is more difficult, therefore texts have to be shorter. It's something that I just don't want to believe, and if you look at my last year's page, it is all one text. And this year I thought, oh my God, I can't talk about this and say you have to be conscious of web pages being designed for usability, and so I broke it up, and actually it may be really easier to follow things.
Ask a question?
Sure.
It seems like, I mean, mostly, I'm interested in things like sciences, computer stuff, maybe also texts of like literature. That usually the two are working against each other. In a way, it's easier to find and handle. And big and small makes it slower. And sometimes I felt, damn it, this is one thing. Why are you forcing me to click? I'm willing to wait a few seconds and just give it to me. Plus, I can search it. Control F. I mean, how do you resolve that?
I think
you're saying the answer is don't try to.
I think it depends on how dedicated you assume your users are. Will they go through hardship to read your stuff? And I'll tell you the truth. If I have the choice, I'll put up a long text. Because I'm like you. Why do I have to click? But all studies say people don't do it. People read the first screen and then they are off. So I guess in a way the answer is, if the kind of material that you offer makes sense on a screen-by-screen basis, try to make it on a screen-by-screen basis. If it doesn't, and you assume your people are really motivated, leave it longer.
Or I guess I could, is it hard to get something like a zip file to download, for instance?
No, not at all.
Like the W3C had for HTML.
Yeah, but then remember I said before, if you assume that long texts will be read on paper, make a printable version. Make a PDF file, make a RTF file, zip it, put it there and say, if you want to read this, we give you a version that you can print, or that you can look at your computer screen without being online. But if you want to provide material that is sort of read in context and connects with other pages, it's not just linear, it should be in short pieces. And the other thing is, to a lot of these things there are no absolute answers, because there are different kinds of people. And you know, some people will behave in one way and some people will behave in another. You just do what makes most sense and offends people not as badly as other things. Texts also have to be scannable. They have to have short paragraphs. They have to have deep headings. They have to have lists, short and descriptive link text. Because that, again, what studies show is what most web users do. They don't sit down and read from the beginning to the end. They just look at it, they scan through it. Is it something that's of interest to me? If it is, they may scan it a bit more thoroughly, but rarely will they read it completely, and they'll go on. I think a very positive thing in this context is that it is possible on the web to write well-documented pieces that have a lot of supporting material with internal and external links. And I think it's actually challenging to produce this kind of content, and it's also, I think, a positive development that people are getting used to this level of quality content. Again, the more important an idea, an argument, or an information, the nearer the top of the page it should be, to avoid being skipped. Content may and very often should live for longer than the layout and technologies, so content should be encoded structurally, so it is easier to reuse. I think it's actually interesting that some of the big newspaper sites have started to sell their old content, which is counterintuitive at first thought, but I think everybody has access more or less easily to today's Financial Times, but finding an article that you're specifically interested in from 5 years ago is indeed something that you might be prepared to pay for, and I think it demonstrates the value of archived quality content. Editing should be done properly, and I think the other really important thing here is that update procedures are not primarily a technical problem. Putting an organizational structure in place that will allow to keep content up to date and correct is a real challenge. And I think you can't have a usable, appreciated site that has content that's actually moldering away. Community is, I think, community on the web is a subject that one could talk about for a long time. I don't know whether anybody has been to Elmer's session yesterday about Technoids.net. The proliferation of information means that putting information in a context, in a community that will validate it, that will point to usability of that information is getting more and more important. Searching. This is actually the classic example of different people. Different users prefer different styles of moving through a site. Some people prefer to follow a navigational scheme or links in a text, and some, actually the majority, not a big majority or not a majority by a big margin, but by some margin prefer searching. Searching also is a bailout option whenever navigation doesn't work, but that means, in my mind, that a well-designed search engine and well-designed search access to all your pages is an absolutely vital element of every site design. And that's actually also why we decided in the Cali design to have a search button on every page. Complex searches are really difficult for users to do. If you put people in a room and you say, find all pages that have references to cats or dogs, most people will sit down and look for cats and dogs and be astonished that they don't find anything. This happens, I'm told, even to seasoned programmers. I'm not sure whether it's true, but it certainly is true for average users. So whenever you use advanced searches, you have to make it really easy for users. You have to give explanatory texts, and you have to give, more than anything else, examples, because that seems to work best. I myself am somebody who really hates search interfaces that will only allow me to look for keywords without giving me a context. I have worked in data management for a long time, and I think I just don't trust it to work out properly. There is keyword search in its own place, and it works for many things, but for many things it doesn't work. And it, more than anything, it doesn't allow me to get a context of my search. It doesn't allow me to know whether my search has been complete or not. That's why we designed this page that allows to access materials from the former Cali conferences in this way as a browsable list. Cali conferences cover a pretty wide range of subjects, and they cover it over time. So ways of referring to things have changed. What has been relevant 5 years ago, nobody thinks about anymore, except for printing. So there is no way of interrogating a database and be reasonably secure that you will get the results that are actually there. So we decided to have actually a pseudo-hierarchical list here that will allow you to see what are the options, and that will allow you to go different paths that may take you to the right thing. And I think actually browsable pages are extremely useful, and they may help users to find things, and they may help you to have your content looked at. The two most important determinants of web usability is quality content and the capacity to find it. When we started the reorganization of the Cali site, we knew that we wanted to re-evaluate the site on the usability aspects. One of the ways of doing this is to run a usability study, which is hard to do. It's very expensive. We decided that we would do a site evaluation, just look at it and say, does this work, does this work, does this work, ourselves. And we decided to have a very detailed look at patterns of actual usage of the old site. And to do this, we went through We went through a very detailed analysis of old pages and used those, and I would like to go just briefly through some of the contexts, the concepts and the results we found. What are the data that can be used in a log analysis? Actually, I have to sit down here. The data that are logged by any server without using cookies in every interaction on the web is the IP number of the visiting machine, the date and time of the request, the exact page or other objects that are requested, and information whether the request could be fulfilled or whether there was a problem. So you get a 200 code if the page was served without a problem. You get the famous 404 code if the page can't be found, and so on. The IP number in many cases will be bound to, or it will correspond to a specific PC, not necessarily to a person, which is unfortunate if you want to analyze actual behavior patterns, but that's what we have. There is no way to know what happens between requests because web servers don't maintain state. They get a request from an IP number asking for a specific page. Time goes by, another request comes from the same IP number for another page. Whether the user in the meantime has read the first page carefully or gone for lunch, we don't know. We don't even know whether it is the same person actually. But web analyzing programs make what they call heuristic assumptions in this case. They will assume that if there are requests from one single IP number within a certain span of time, normally quarter of an hour, it will be a visit, it will be a sequential request, it will come probably from the same person. One problem with many log analysis is that all objects are included. All objects that are requested are logged. And it is a decision for the person who's doing the analysis which of these objects are included. So often the objects will be graphical elements, and if you include graphical elements, it will bloat the request figures, because if you ask for a page with 20 graphical elements on it, you have 25 requests, but only one request for a meaningful unit. So we have excluded all requests for graphical elements. The next, so in all, the data that are available in a log analysis aren't all that great. The quality of the data is limited. They don't allow the direct observation of the behavior that we are interested in. What is the person doing with the material? But on the other hand, that is a frequent problem in analysis. It's very rare that you are able to measure the concept you are directly interested in. You normally have to fall back on behavior that is indicative. I'll try and mention now, very briefly, some of the concepts that we were trying to measure. Of course, first question, how did the site do? How did it develop? Now, if you just look at the figures, I think you may go very wrong, and I think the Cali site is a good example, because during the time for which we evaluated the access to the server, the number of CDs with lessons that were distributed increased from about 500 CDs to about 19,000. So the same material that people can see on the Cali server, on the lessons area of the Cali server, was additionally distributed. The web is not the only access mechanism. So the real growth of interest that we are trying to measure here, how many people are using Kali lessons, is increase on the web plus increased use of the CD. Now, of course, whether people use their CDs or they put them on the Christmas tree is equally everybody's guess as whether they have read a web page or not. The overall development, I show here overall increase of visits for the Kali site, that is the Kali www.kali.org, the lessons site, which is the specific site area for the distribution of lessons, and the two together. I give the figures for visits from June 1999. This is until November 2000 because I'm using the version of the log analysis that we used actually for the restructuring of the site. The new figures are up on the same in the same area, and you know, it looks moved. It goes in general up. There are peaks in December. There are drops in May, June, July. It's hard to evaluate this kind of table. So what I did first thing was not only to look at the absolute figures, but to look at increases. And to look at increase relative to the months in the same months in the year before. Because obviously web access on academic sites is highly seasonal. So it makes no sense to compare May data and say, this is wonderful, and look at the same site 3 months later in August and say, terrible, nobody's coming anymore. No, they will come back again in September and October. And you can see that we have very different increase levels between different areas of the site. The increase in the Kali site itself was around 20% over a year and dropping. The increase in the lessons area was about 100% at some stages and then again dropping too. We didn't like that. It is very difficult to evaluate the overall success of a site numerically. If you have a site like Kali, with whom can you compare it? If you have a law school site, which other law school is going to give their figures so you can compare it? So I think the first thing is to establish a point of reference. Not having another institution, we looked at a theoretical target audience. Where am I here? Sorry. No, too far up. Here. We looked at a theoretical target audience. Our theoretical target audience in the US would be defined as about 130,000 law students, 9,000 law faculty members, and about 2,000 librarians and technology support staff. The Kali website do not address the general public, so we don't need to compare ourselves to Microsoft. On this background, I think that monthly visit numbers between 17,000 and 59,000 for the combined logs is a reasonably good result. And this is, of course, on a monthly basis. So over a year, you know, we don't know how many people really come back, how many are new. But on a yearly basis, I think we reach a fairly big chunk out of our target audience. That's the first point, number of visits. Then, how has the site developed over time? Academic sites show an overlay of two distinct usage patterns. You get, first of all, a seasonal usage pattern which follows the cycle of the academic year. Clear to all of us, I guess. And then you get a second pattern, which is overall growth. So I would expect on an academic site to see about a doubling, perhaps a bit less, perhaps a bit more, depending on how well established the site is, from one point in the year to the same point in the next year. The next measure that we try to use is the number of requests per visit. The question here is, a person comes to the site, they look at pages. At how many pages do they look? The assumption behind it is that if they find reasonable, interesting content, they will look at more pages. If they don't find anything of interest, they will go away. There's a broken link. I'm sorry about that. I'll fix it later today. It's hard to do this without the graph. The pattern of the usage intensity actually in general was not very high. But in a more detailed analysis we found that it was very different for different areas of the site. And we found that, for example, the conference area had a relatively high usage, and to our actually very great surprise we found that even materials from old conferences are still looked at a reasonably high rate, which we hadn't expected, which we interpreted as meaning that there is more interest in this material than we had assumed, and this is given the fact that it wasn't very easy to find. So one of the design decisions we took from the log analysis was to improve accessibility to conference materials. And actually this is the page I had been showing you before with the subject areas of conference materials was the response to this fact. And we will assume that the use of these areas will go up even further. The Cali area gets a reasonably high number of hits from search engines, yeah, well, it's a reasonably high number. It's not wild, but it's high. What I found really interesting and really surprising is analysis not only of the log figures themselves, but looking at doing a reverse search to the Cali site, looking at all sites that had links to the Cali site, and we found that there is a big number of links to the home page, but there are practically no links to lower level pages. I mean, actually abysmal. 36 links within the conference area, within the lessons area. So one of the aims in the redesign of the site was to make it easier for other people to identify areas of interest that they may want to link to. And this actually, I think, is very important also to note that redesign of a site can go so far only. But after that you have to improve the content areas and you have to improve knowledge in the community. I mean, we can have wonderfully designed navigational pages. If nobody ever takes the time to change links in hot lists to that level, it will have little effect. So I think there's always a sense of community follow-up, of talking to people, of writing to people, of mentioning that things are there. I think this is all on the web. I'll fix the link to the graph. It's terrible, actually. Actually, this is the same analysis with the up-to-date data from May, and the graph is there. So you see there is no very clear pattern in the development of requests per visit, but definitely there isn't a positive pattern. I'm afraid this is it. There are another 2 pages if you would like to look at them. Another thing that should be mentioned in this context is a log analysis should not only look at visits, it should also look very in very great detail at the error logs that are produced by the web server, because this is the first port of call to fix obvious mistakes in the site. Wrong links, things like that. Thank you very much. If anybody has a question or comments, or I'll be